Welcome to Thursday Night Talk. This is a show where we discuss the week in Humboldt, the local issues and the local personalities with the local personalities. I'm Talvi Freed. I'll be your local host for the next hour. Tonight, our topic is the recovery in Rio Dell. On December 20th, 2022, a 6.4 earthquake occurred at 2:34 a.m. If you were there, you still remember this, even though it feels like years ago now, and was centered near Ferndale. 2 people died and over a dozen people were injured. The quake resulted in millions of dollars in property damages to Rio Dell and the surrounding area. And here we are to question, what was the scope of the damage? What resources were able to be brought to bear in its wake? What is the status of the recovery efforts in Rio Dell and the Eel River Valley? And the bigger question, what have we learned from the last big earthquake, and are we prepared for the next big earthquake? Joining us tonight, we've got a wonderful panel here. The Mayor of Rio Dell, Debra Garnes, Rio Dell City Manager, Kyle Knopp, and Humboldt Eel River Valley Long-Term Recovery Group Chair, Nick Bown-Crawford. Welcome everyone.
Hi, Talvi.
Hi. I think let's start with what happened within the first few days after the earthquake in Rio Dell. I'm not sure who best to, I'm just gonna popcorn. Whoever feels like talking, feel free to just start talking.
Well, I think Kyle or Mayor Debra can kind of kick it off because they were there on the grounds when it was happening, and then I came in about 24 hours later. So yeah.
Okay, let's start with Debra then. What was going on, like first few minutes after, hours after, and then the days after?
Strangely enough, I think actually Kyle is the best to answer this, but I will tell you from my perspective, it was just trying to get yourself settled, and you know, where you can walk through your house and make a path. But I think that initially, the 10 minutes after the earthquake, the Senate Majority Leader, Mike McGuire, gave me a call to reach out to see how things were and to let us know that the state would be there for us in any way that they could throughout the process. And then the volunteer fire department, they were actually the first on scene. They were the first responders. They responded to gas leaks, water leaks, injuries. So I think in the initial aftermath, it was mainly the first responders responding to different people in different areas of the city, and for whatever they needed. Then I think the city manager and the supervisor, Michelle Bushnell, and came down to the fire department, and I think that's when things started happening. Our water department and wastewater department personnel immediately, even though they were very affected, especially our water superintendent was very affected. He, left home right away. Our police department, everybody left home to go and, start trying to decide, start trying to figure out what the next steps are, where to go, what to do, how, assess, because you have to start assessing right away assess the damage, assess what's happening with the city structures, assess what's happening with the community, that kind of thing. I'm gonna actually turn it over to Kyle because he is our emergency response person. He is the man, and he was the man, and he did an absolutely outstanding job. So he can actually probably tell you what happened initially. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Kyle.
Thank you, Deborah, and thank you, Talvi, for organizing this this call. I think my initial reaction with the earthquake was that, and my dog is going off in the background here, but my initial reaction to the earthquake was that we were going to have to prepare and get ready to go and assist Ferndale. The earthquake, when you look at the epicenter, was a lot closer to Ferndale. It didn't take much longer than that to determine that actually Rio Dell had been hit the hardest in the earthquake. And so we knew immediately we had problems with the water system within the first hour. And we had some pretty dramatic calls to basically shut down the system, which almost never happens. And really, when it became apparent that we had multiple structures down, we started making some phone calls to organize building inspectors to come into town. And so we could start doing the red tagging and yellow tagging and assessments of structures for safety. So kind of from there, we went and just took it hour by hour. Initially, we had great support from the county, from John Ford's building team, and we had a really great support from City of Arcata, Eureka, and others who came down and provided that initial level of building inspections. So in the first 8 hours of our inspections, we determined that there were 55 red tag structures, and that number remained basically the same throughout the first week. So in that first 8 hours, we actually got to most of those damaged structures. Fairly easy to identify from the street. But,
so question about the different color tags. Does red tag mean completely demolished, cannot be salvaged?
No, it means it's not safe for occupancy. So a red tag means, for example, there's structural damage. A yellow tag might mean only restricted access. So for example, somebody might have a carport that's partially collapsed, or even a porch that has collapsed. But those are structures that are opportunate to the building. They're not necessarily integral to the structure. And so you would be restricted from the use of those facilities.
How many of the red tags, of the 55 red tags, were people's homes?
All of them. So yeah, so the remarkably the commercial buildings of Rio Dell were only moderately impacted. The main damage occurred almost exclusively to residential structures. So, and eventually, and after the aftershock, and eventually we had the state crews come in, we got up to a number of 91 structures, which equated to 125 dwelling units. So that's, fourplexes, duplexes, apartment buildings, that sort of thing included in that number.
How many people were then essentially displaced from their homes during that time?
So it was somewhere around 250 people, could have been as high as 300, but certainly one of the largest displacement events in Humboldt County history. Now, I will say that the red tags and the yellow tags, they're all advisory tags. If somebody's going into their structure that's been red tagged, the police aren't going to storm in there and tackle people and send them off to jail or something like that. It's really up to the individual. The job of the city is to make sure that the individual is informed, the families are informed that their structure is uninhabitable. And so people make those determinations on their own.
So after all of the initial damage, in the first few days, and everything was tagged and documented. What was the progress over time, and where is it at now?
Yeah, so one of the complications that we had immediately following the earthquake, as everybody knows, there were a huge series of storms, which was great for the drought disaster, but was very problematic for the earthquake recovery process, because you have a lot of structures that have gaps in their roofs or whatnot, so now they're getting water damage in addition to the earthquake damage. And it's really hard to do a whole lot of, construction work during those rain events. And so there was kind of a slow rollout to the repair effort today. So we went from 91 to where we're at today with 51 structures red tagged. So we've taken off that many red tags. And we also have some that are coming up for inspection either tomorrow or Monday. That will further reduce that number, probably closer to 50. So there has been a lot of progress made. Approximately $1.6 million worth of work has been conducted to date, based on permit requests and level of work accomplished. One of the problems, so there has been significant progress made, but one of the problems we do have is that roughly half of those red tag structures remain in a state where they have not contacted the city, or they have not contacted our building official to either confirm work is being done or plans or anything like that. And so, there's a couple of different scenarios there. One is that people have walked away from a home. Another is that they're doing work without pulling permits. So there's a couple different explanations for that, but we want to encourage everybody to come and involve the city in that, because there are, contractors are not perfect, and mistakes are made, and we do have a great building department that is able to catch some of those mistakes, make sure that, for example, water heaters are properly strapped. It may sound like something very simple, but one of the main problems in this earthquake that was discovered is that there were a lot of improperly strapped water heaters. So water heaters not strapped at all, or strapped to gas lines, stuff like that, that was really inappropriate. It's very dangerous.
Of a water heater not being strapped, other than it falling over and maybe causing flood damage because of a pipe break.
Flood damage, gas leaks, water damage. It's really hard to get somebody back into a home with no hot water, that sort of thing. So there's very simple things that people can do, and to make sure that their contractor is licensed, properly licensed, to do the work appropriately, and to ensure the code. Because one thing is for certain, there will be another earthquake at some point in the future, and if the water tank is put back up in the way it was before, it's going to fall back down again. So these are some of the issues that we're facing moving forward, but I think we're making some significant progress, especially considering really only the last month or so has been good weather. So
what happens if a person does not have the money to afford to fix anything and also does not have insurance?
So that's a great question. And I'll just give a brief overview and then turn it over to Nick. But the reality is I believe there were only 4 houses in Rio Dell that had earthquake insurance. So earthquake insurance typically only kicks in after about $30,000 worth of damages. But the thing I want to just stress before I turn it over to Nick is that all things start with disaster case management, And we need people to utilize that phone number, which is 707-382-5890. That's the point of entry for any kind of assistance that you're going to receive. It's not going to be from calling the county OES. It's not going to be from calling Rio Dell City Hall. It's not going to be from calling Habitat for Humanity. It's going to be using that number is your entry point to receive assistance that we are able to provide at this point in time. So I can't stress that enough. 707-382-5890. And then I think maybe Nick can talk a little bit more about kind of the long-term recovery group and what we're doing.
Absolutely, though I want, for those who just tuned in and are just hearing a phone number, who's behind that phone number?
So that is our disaster case management workers. We're with Arcata House Partnership and with Changing Tides. However, again, don't call Changing Tides or Arcata House Partnership directly. You want to call this line. This is the only way to access that service. So disaster case management is basically a time-limited service where a skilled professional disaster case manager works specifically with the client. So that can be individuals or families in order to achieve realistic goals for recovery following this disaster. So they're going to perform outreach. So getting people to call in. They're going to perform screening and intake for case management services. They're going to do assessment of the individual client's needs. They're going to start working with those clients to do planning, recovery planning for them. They're going to look at the action and advocacy, coordination and implementation of what is the services available to folks. And they're going to do monitoring of the recovery process for those individual clients. And eventually each case will be closed out. So that's kind of the base overview of the disaster case management process. But obviously each individual situation is extremely unique and different. And so, a lot of these cases are going to take a lot of time to work through. And I think what Nick is going to say is that long-term recovery really truly does mean long-term. They're still rebuilding Paradise. They're still working on a lot of projects. And actually here in Rio Dell, we've gotten this group up and running in relatively short order compared to some of the other similar disasters in California. And we're really, proud of that. But that's the basic overview. And then again, 707-382-5890. That's your entry point to receive all and any assistance provided.
Great. So we are going to let Nick shine right after a quick break. Be right back here on Thursday Night Talk. Welcome back to Thursday Night Talk, everyone. I'm your local host, Talvi Freed. I am here with a wonderful panel, Debra Garnes, Nick Bown-Crawford, and Kyle Knopp, and we are discussing the Rio Dell recovery and what has happened since the earthquake, what we've learned from that earthquake, because we are an area that is prone to natural disasters, and we are discussing what is still needed in Rio Dell. As Kyle had said right before the break, even Paradise is still rebuilding. Rio Dell still is rebuilding as well. Natural disasters can take quite some time. So Nick, as you are the person who believes in long-term recovery, what does it take to go from red tag structures, water line breaks? I don't know if there were electrical fires. I imagine that there might have been some. What does it take to go from that to making sure that these structures are rebuilt, and also so that this doesn't happen again?
Yeah, so I think, kind of to paint a little bit of a picture. So a lot of people, there's a lot of misunderstanding about like who does recovery work after disasters. The biggest thing to kind of realize is that government does not participate in recovery after a disaster, unless you have a presidential FEMA declaration, which we did not get. So there's a really high dollar amount threshold that you have to meet in order to get that federal declaration. And that's based on dollar damages to structures. So if you're living in a neighborhood that has multi-million-dollar homes that's about the size of Rio Dell, they would have qualified immediately for the federal declaration. But when you're typically in a rural environment that doesn't have home values that high, you don't qualify, and then you don't get access to FEMA. FEMA is the only government agency that participates in direct recovery for individuals after a disaster. So what this means is that this is really a community-driven and community-led recovery process. And so that's where the formation of the long-term recovery group came from. It's a little bit of a draw out of the work that we did within COAD, which is Community Organizations Active in Disasters. So that group, over 50 local organizations, all non-governmental, participated very heavily in the relief and the response directly after the earthquake. And now a lot of that membership, and myself included as kind of the formation leader and chair of this recovery group, have come over to really partner with the community on their long-term journey. And our goal is to restore their lives, households, property, and livelihoods back to where it was before the earthquake. So that's a really multifaceted task to approach. People lost income, they lost jobs, they lost their childcare availability, they lost their homes. So that, everything down to, those couple of China cups that fell out of the cabinet. So what we're really tasked with is figuring out what these individuals, these impacted community members, what their pictures kind of look like. And we start matching them up with services, and we're doing fundraising in the background to raise pretty large amounts of philanthropic dollars. Humboldt Area Foundation has been a huge player in that field with us, in terms of securing several $1 million for us to utilize for these rebuild projects. The county has also been a big partner because they're kind of handing off a lot of this kind of case management handling over to us. And so the long-term recovery group, independently forms a case management system, which is, it's a very traditional, we're checking all the boxes, and we were able to start up this case management system with the software and the personnel and the training and the space where they're working in just a matter of a couple months. So what the goal of these case managers have is, that really partnering with these individuals, navigating them through these services that we can provide. And then on my end of the long-term recovery group, we're fundraising, we're drawing up community engagement, and we're bringing in our larger kind of specialized disaster-focused charitable groups. So Habitat for Humanity is one of our largest partners. Hope Crisis Network, that's our other large rebuild partner. And so what we do is we partner with local contractors, and we're sourcing these local contractors for these organizations to use while they're in town. and then they backfill with their infrastructure and expertise. All of the materials and supplies that we're using for these projects are also being sourced as local as possible to Rio Dell. So we start sourcing as close to home as we can so that we're just continuing to drive money back into the economy. And then we're kind of fanning out. So this really is kind of just top to bottom, a Humboldt's like led recovery and rebuild process. And like Kyle said, you know, we do have a pretty large kind of mountain to climb. You know, it's not an insignificant amount of homes. You know, we are still looking at this, you know, high 50s and red unsafe tags hanging on doors, and that, you know, the yellow tags are even larger. That's over 200 that are hanging on doors currently. So yellow tags are restricted use. So, you know, it's still somewhat allowable to live there depending on the situation. But, you know, these issues that impacts to the homes that are even on a yellow tag, these are things that prevent people from, you know, obtaining homeowners insurance in the future, or they're going to get compounded over time. You know, it might be a small crack in the wall, but all it's going to take is another, you know, super rainy season, and then you get, you know, water entry into the home, and then you get mold development. So these little tiny things like really kind of snowball into large issues. A lot of people, like kind of even folks that drive around Rio Dell, they're like, you know, oh, this doesn't look too bad. But when you do take a closer look, there's, you know, a house may look like it's in pretty good condition, but if you like zoom into the foundation, you'll notice the house is 6 inches off the foundation. And that creates a really unsafe environment, you know, obviously. So what we're really trying to do is, you know, our initial job was to get to know the community at a very personal level and develop that very kind of empathetic and understanding relationship with them and their household and their families. And so that we can really kind of assess their needs. There are some pieces of everybody's projects that are going to take a long time, like some of the larger construction projects. You know, unfortunately, I don't have a magic wand yet, and it's, so, you know, whatever we can do in the meantime for these folks while these longer term projects are happening, that's what we're working on, setting up these more supportive services during the recovery process. And that covers everything from childcare to introducing healthier foods into the community, food access into the community, you know, job placement services, like kind of runs the gamut. And, you know, but the overarching end goal is we're taking care of these, like our 3 primary missions are making sure always that the food, water, and shelter of the community are met in the most human and compassionate way possible.
How did the earthquake affect the population of Rio Dell?
Yeah, so I think like there's this one, like, you know, as somebody, so I was on the ground in Rio Dell within 48 hours after the event. And the hat I was wearing at that time was managing the emergency food access. And so we largely focused on prepared hot meals because virtually the entire town had no ability to store, cook, or operate or cook in a sanitary environment. So no potable water, no gas, no electricity, no refrigeration. And so that's really, you know, you can give people boxes of canned goods, you know, until the cows come home, but that doesn't really do anything for somebody who can't do anything with those canned goods, you know? So we developed a very large prepared meals program. We expanded it when the storm started. So we actually fanned out over the entire county and served around 35,000 meals in about 3.5 weeks. So I really like got to know a lot of the residents very personally because I was the popular guy in town because I had the food. And the kind of the one common denominator that really still exists today to a very large extent is like trauma. There's a high degree of trauma surrounding the event. And, you know, I remember being down there and, you know, folks would drive up to the food lines, and they would, you know, their possessions were in the car because they were just afraid to go back into their house. Stories of people sleeping in their shoes and fully clothed every night for, you know, most of them over a month because they were just so petrified that something was going to happen again in the middle of the night. The initial earthquake happened at 2 something in the morning. And so they still kind of retain this. And I'm on the message boards with a lot of the community too. They've kind of welcomed me into their circle. And, you know, every time there's the smallest earthquake, it is like, you know, hundreds of messages lighting up, people just rattled once again. So that kind of, there is a lot of like disaster distress is what it's called. So it's a form of PTSD. And that's also something that we really keep an eye out for on the recovery side of things. And our case managers are all very skilled, highly trained. They come from some of our best partners in town, Arcata House and Changing Tides Family Services. They're all bilingual, and they're, you know, so they're really trained to like look out for these signs of PTSD and severe trauma to make sure that, you know, we can provide and layer in whether it be counseling or spiritual services, whatever the individual needs.
Debra, I know it seems like you had wanted to say something, and especially as somebody who does, I feel like the mayors that I'm familiar with, I don't live in Rio Dell, that they seem to engage directly with a lot of people in the community and community members. So what have you seen from your perspective?
I think, as Nick was saying, the trauma of it all is I think the most visible thing. It was devastating from your home perspective, from your possessions, but we've all been through earthquakes before. We've been through big earthquakes before and had loads of things break, but the violence that this earthquake brought, both on the 20th and on the 1st, it was different. It's scarred people in a different way than previous earthquakes. I've talked to just numerous people who were here during the '92 earthquake, because that was apparently the big standard of bad earthquakes before this. And I've not come across one person who thought, and I think we lost the bridge. There was no one who thought that '92 earthquake was as bad as these 2 earthquakes. It's left us with just this internally, any creak, any movement, anything that is startling, and you just react. You feel like you need to dive under a table because this is the earthquake that's coming in. And you know, people had to they were meeting at someone's house, just trying to talk with each other and try to process this because it was so traumatic. And so, you know, I was able to go out into the community and meet a lot of people I actually hadn't met before, and talk to those people. And you could sense the unease that is still there to this day. It has left a scar, and it has left a scar on a lot of our citizens. And you know, we have done a community emergency response training, so that we have a CERT team that we're developing. And that's, you know, a response to that, because even though you cannot predict it, and you can only do what you can do, any sense that you have improved your knowledge of emergency response, anything that you can do to make you feel as if, okay, I'm a little more prepared, I have my go bag ready, those are things that at least give you a little sense of comfort that you have done everything that you can do. The problem is that, you know, it's an earthquake. There's tornado seasons, there are hurricane seasons. You can plan. As devastating as they are, you can put boards on your windows. You can, you know, you can do a lot of things. You can get your, you know, underground cave ready for you know, an earthquake, or I mean for a hurricane or a tornado. But for an earthquake, you're just sitting around minding your own business, and it is so unsettling. And again, these two earthquakes were absolutely violent in Rio Dell. I think they must have probably been violent in most of Humboldt up here anyway, but in Rio Dell, they were absolutely violent. The first one literally reached the point of gravity, gravityness less, where just for a split second, you know, but the G-force was so great. It was 1.45. And so the north end of town, because it was centered on Ferndale, it was really devastated. Houses came off of foundations and such. The second earthquake for the south end of town, because it was closer to Redcrest rather, it was devastating for the south end of town. From my perspective, because I live on the southern end of Rio Dell, it was actually more violent than the first one. We had so many more things broken in our house, you know, flung out of the refrigerator, out of the cabinets on the second one. So much more than the first one, just because we were at the south end and it was centered to the south. So I think that things of this nature have just made it so difficult for people to move away from it. And normally, it's an earthquake, you're unsettled for a few days, and then you forget. Well, this one, the 20th, by the time we started settling down, I woke up on January 1st. I looked out, I was like, look, the sun's shining. I literally said those words. The sun's shining. It's going to be great. It's a new year. And 10:30, whatever, boom, it hit. And so, and from that point on, it's just like, okay, I don't trust anything. No one trusts anything. We think it's going to start at any moment. So I think that's the biggest thing that I've seen from our community, is that lack of being able to settle back down and to move away from it. So, you know, it's just been a very, very crazy, unsettling time, but hopefully we'll get beyond that. But I think that there is a trauma that is going to take equally as long as fixing a home, fixing red tags. I think the trauma that is inside of us is going to last, sadly, for a long time as well.
So I'd like to get more into what services there are for those with that trauma, as well as community rebuilding, and not just a let's fix these structures, but let's fix the fear factor, as well as what we can learn from other communities about how Rio Dell has had to deal with this and how they are dealing with that. And we'll do that right after a quick break. everyone to Thursday Night Talk. I'm Talvi Freed, and we are discussing the recovery of Rio Dell after the earthquakes of, I guess technically 2023, because it was January 1st, as well as the one on December 20th in 2022. And I am here with Debra Garnes, Nick Bown-Crawford, as well as Kyle Knopp. We'll get back into the credentials, and you can always rewatch this program on channel 12, I believe, on Access Humboldt. It'll be playing throughout the weekend. We also replay this on radio, on KZZH, what you're listening to now, throughout the weekend as well. And then you can look us up on YouTube and see our shiny, happy faces. Maybe not so shiny happy for this particular topic, though often we are shiny happy. I think everybody, I mean, I'm grateful that I'm still here because that earthquake was scary. I'm based in Eureka. It was not like, gee, this is fun. And I'm pretty sure a lot of other people feel that way too. Deborah was saying right before the break how kind of the trauma that occurred in Rio Dell by having to suffer through such a, as you said, Deborah, a violent earthquake, as it was very violent. Even here in Eureka, I was like, oh, that is, and it kept going. Like it just didn't stop. And it felt like, I wasn't sure if that feeling was like time slowing down for my mind or if it just really was that long. So I want to ask, what have we learned from the situation with Rio Dell? How is, what worked for Rio Dell since then? Obviously, there's still a lot being worked on. And how can we use that information for the future for Rio Dell as well as the rest of the county and any community, really? Let's start with Kyle.
Thank you. Yeah, I think one of the big takeaways, starting with the positive, is that having a vibrant volunteer fire department in the community with a lot of volunteers and people who are fundraising and working to support the fire department in a lot of different ways is a huge asset. So folks out there, don't be afraid to contribute to your volunteer fire department. There's a lot of different ways to do it. I would say that covers, the initial 48 plus, hour response where just things get crazy and you have to rely on a lot of different people, not just the sworn fire staff, but your neighbors and community members who kind of know how to respond to that. And Deborah's been spearheading the creation of a new community emergency response team in Rio Dell to even further bolster that. And a lot of other communities also have or are in the process of creating their own CERTs, community emergency response teams. So that's one of the positives. I would say some of the things that I would encourage people to think about is infrastructure. You have to invest in your infrastructure and you have to have robust, modern facilities. So in this case, a lot of our water breakages are on lines that we knew we needed to get replaced. We had been working for years on a grant application process to replace the very lines that broke. And fortunately, the earthquake helped speed up that allocation of 100% grant money to perform a project that will replace these lines. But it's important that a community have modern infrastructure so that you aren't running out of water in the middle of right when it's needed potentially the most. Because folks will remember back in '92, after one of the aftershocks, a good portion of Scotia burned down from a gas leak. And so we need to make sure that that infrastructure is updated continually. And then there's just little things. We were able to maintain an open city hall during the entire event, including holding press conferences and other necessary events and meetings, because the city had invested in and received some grants to do a solar project with battery backups, with an emergency generator. And so that facility remained open the entire time and fully, operational, with the exception of the communications issues, which is the other point I would get to, is that folks ought to consider having multiple means and methods of communication. So I think today everybody's so dependent on their cell phone, and even when the data goes out, it's a major hassle. But I think people need to consider different ways of alternate communication. Even satellite phones are not as expensive as they used to be, and you can get them on a pay per use charge system, and just other, maintaining an old copper line, that sort of thing. Just have multiple modes of communication, so that you can not just receive information from your radio, but that you can also push information out. And that was one of the difficulties that we had in Rio Dell in the initial event. In the first 24, 48 hours was almost all of our entire communications infrastructure collapsed. And so it was really difficult to get messages out, and you almost had to ferry people out in their cars up to Eureka or something to make phone calls. And that was a real difficult situation. But
on that note, Rio Dell's it's a Southwest repeater, was still functioning, and I was very impressed with that, because our repeater out at the Muni went out.
Yeah.
So that was down. So everybody up in Eureka was contacting Rio Dell. For those who are unaware, definitely
that's good to hear.
It's ham radio. I'm a very big fan of it, and
So,
the one situation that I trust is a two-way comm radio.
yeah.
Because that will, it's not gonna call, your family in out of the country or anything like that, but you can reach somebody, because there's a bunch of nerds out here in Humboldt County. You can reach somebody when you need it.
Yeah, I neglected to mention the most powerful tool of them all, which is the ham radio. So I think, just having, really think it through, because if your home is not inhabitable, do you have an alternate plan? Do you have family? If you don't, one thing you might consider is just regularly going camping. And if you can stay out in the woods in a tent for a few days, you got it made. If you can, boil water, that sort of thing, without having to use your kitchen. Just really practical things that you can incorporate into your, normal life, so you don't have to go and spend thousands of dollars on a kit bag or something just waiting for the 30-year event. But that, it's just incorporated into the way that you operate and live. Because I'll just be honest, if you are depending on aid from the government, you're in a bad situation. The further you can stay away from congregate living situations or having to be sheltered in a motel or hotel, the better off you are, because those are options of absolute last resort. And again, as Nick mentioned, this was not a FEMA declared disaster. And so the resources that we have to work with are considerably smaller than if this had been a FEMA declared disaster. And so the county stepped forward and had to put up over $300,000 in short-term housing for people in motel and hotel rooms. At one point, I believe they had about 125 rooms throughout the county occupied with Rio Dell residents. If we didn't have that option, your only option would have been the Red Cross shelter, and that, is, not the most desirable, it's absolutely last, resort that you want to go to. So the more independent you are, so that the available resources of the county, of the city, are able to take care of the elderly, the most vulnerable population in the community, who might have very limited options. That's really where our focus has to be. And I just encourage people, again, to be as self-sufficient and have the ability to kind of go off the grid for a few days is very valuable.
For those of our listeners who are getting fired up, being like, wow, I didn't know Rio Dell is still struggling quite a bit. And Rio Dell is a very vibrant, I've always considered them one of the more self-sufficient of a very self-sufficient county. Though struggle is real. And for those listeners getting fired up, how can they help?
So yeah, I'll take that one on. So they can definitely, there's different ways listed how you can help on the long-term recovery group's website, which is humboldtrecovery.org. So you can sign up to volunteer with Habitat for Humanity or just at the community level. You can also donate. So like money is probably the biggest way that you can help, because money actually makes these projects happen. And then, kind of lastly, I think that, there's two other ones that people don't really think about automatically. Go to Rio Dell, like spend some money there, like go get a waffle at the only drive-through waffle restaurant that I've ever probably exists in the country, and that just got a write-up by SF Gate magazine as the best waffles hands down in California. So like big plug for Wildwood waffles, like go get it if you haven't had it yet. So visiting, interacting with the communities, supporting them by like patronizing the businesses there is really important. And then, the other way that you can help from like the perspective of the disaster management community is be prepared for the next one, because the more of the community that's prepared, the less resources are going to be expended and the more targeted with our responses we can be to the people that really need it. Otherwise, if you have a swath of the county that's just kind of halfway prepared, then all of these like personnel and resources just get spread super thin. And that really there's some great resources on our website and on the county's Department of Emergency Services, Office of Emergency Services website. So, resources like building your own preparedness plan, and that's a really simple thing. It's a PDF already made for you. You just print it out and play Mad Libs with it. And then, put it on your fridge and share it with your neighbors. Like that's the big important thing with emergency preparedness plans is don't be like secret and cagey about it, because if part of your plan is to disappear in the woods, like Kyle suggested, and nobody knows, then, you've created a whole different issue. So, like be communicative about your plans in an emergency, collaborate with your neighbors on that, check in with your neighbors regularly about if they're prepared or not. Make sure, get them an extra jug of water to keep in the basement or the, back room next time you're going to the grocery store. So I think like mutual aid is a big method of helping be prepared for the next one. There's also some really awesome digital tools out there these days that pretty recently rolled out. So, we have the Humboldt On Alert program. You do have to enroll. So like get those alerts, the most up-to-date ones. Some of the really critical ones, like everybody in Northern California got the initial earthquake alerts because it was such a large event. But for some of the more community targeted alerts, like you do have to sign up for the Humboldt On Alert. You can do that on our website, on the county's website. And then the other important piece that we're really utilizing a lot these days, especially in terms of, earthquakes and tsunamis and wildfires, is the Know Your Zone. And so this is just a platform, put in your address, it tells you exactly what evacuation zone you're in. And so if there is an evacuation that is triggered, you know exactly what your number is, you know exactly where you're supposed to be going. So this is just one of those, like, you know, knowledge is power sort of situations. So yeah, there's a lot of resources.
We are now into the round robin time period. I'm kind of starting the clock on you already. But the round robin is when each of you get two-ish minutes to let our listeners and or those watching on the Access Humboldt TV station just what you want them to take away from our conversations here. So I'm going to give you another minute, Nick, and just so you can finish what you're saying. But I was like, oh, we're into the round robins. So
oh, good. Yeah, so just kind of, I think, the biggest thing that I can instill with folks is this is going to be a very continued community driven recovery period. So please get involved. And it's really, there's a large part of the county that really doesn't realize how bad the Eel River Valley and Rio Dell in particular was impacted by this. So if you are absorbing any of this information, please tell other folks in your circle, because the more people that we have aware about what happens, that's going to better prepare them for the next event. It's also going to promote them to jump in with this process in Rio Dell so that we can make it a 1-year process instead of a 5-year process. And yeah, just be prepared. It's we live in one of the most active disaster areas in the country. So, we have risk from sea and storms and earthquakes and wildfires. So we've really kind of got it all going on here. So yeah.
We really do. Thank you, Nick. Let's pop over to Debra.
Well, quickly, I really just want to, there's certain programs, Bolt and Brace, that you can apply for. Those are grants to brace up your home so that, and it's not going to fully pay for it, but there's some grant funds available, and it's really something that would be helpful to your home and to your safety. But the one thing is, I want to just say how proud I am of Rio Dell staff, of just the community as a whole. You talk about how you always hear about communities reaching out and being there for each other in times of disaster. Well, it is absolutely true. We witnessed it here. Our community reached out to each other, helped each other, was supportive of each other. And it is something that the community, if they are listening in Rio Dell, should be proud of, the way that we looked out for each other. And that's, there are a lot of things that you can't cover because you don't have the time. So I just wanted to say that I am so proud to be a part of Rio Dell, to be a part of the Rio Dell team, and the team is the community. And we all came together, and it was in a disaster, a beautiful thing to see and to witness.
Thank you, Debra. Kyle, you've got 2 minutes or a little bit under.
I will be quick. So, my message is to the citizens of Rio Dell and the broader community: the federal government is not here. It is not fair, but it is what happened. The team that you see here with Nick Bown-Crawford and the group are here, and we are doing the best that we can to pull down resources to help this community in this situation. So we're doing everything that we can. And again, I will just plug this number because I really need to get this message out, which is that your recovery effort, if you are personally impacted, and it doesn't even have to necessarily be Rio Dell residents, but all things start with disaster case management. We need you to call this line, 707-382-5890. And that gets you into the queue. Even if you don't think you qualify for services, we need to get you in that queue, and we need people to call that number to receive the assistance that has been made available. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I'd like to thank all of our panel, Mayor of Rio Dell, Debra Garnes, Humboldt Eel River Valley Long-Term Recovery Group Chair Nick Bown-Crawford, and Rio Dell City Manager Kyle Knopp. I feel like I've learned a lot today, and I appreciate you all and your continued efforts to make something positive out of a really hard situation. That's all the time we have today. We'll be back next week with another Thursday Night Talk. If you have topics or suggestions for the show, please email us at kzzh@accesshumboldt.net. And a reminder, the show replays on Friday evening at 8 p.m. right here on 96.7 FM KZZH. You can watch this show on Access Humboldt's YouTube channel, as well on channel 12 if you have your typical cable throughout the weekend. Have a great, lovely evening.
Thank you for keeping Rio Dell in the front.
What was that?
Thank you for keeping Rio Dell in the forefront. We appreciate it.
Thank you.